You won't believe this shocking true story. A manager humiliated an old janitor, treating him like dirt. But a year later, karma struck in the most unbelievable way. When he finally learned the truth about the man he mocked, it was too late. Stay till the end, because this twist will leave you speechless. But before we dive in, show some kindness by smashing that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and hit the like button, because you do not want to miss stories like this. Now let's get started. The rain had been relentless that night, drumming against the city streets, washing away footprints and forgotten dreams. Inside a small, dimly lit diner on 8th Avenue, an old black man sat alone in the corner, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of cheap coffee. His name was Samuel Carter, though most had stopped calling him anything at all. The world had moved on without him. Samuel had spent his entire life working, building, sacrificing, giving. Every dollar he made every sleepless night had been for his two daughters, Ava and Eleanor, twins, one black like him, the other white like their late mother. He had given them everything, private schools, lavish birthdays, even his entire savings when they needed to start their businesses. And in return, silence. They had forgotten him. The moment the money dried up, so did their calls. They lived in different cities now, successful, elegant, and detached. It had been 3 years since they last saw him. They forgot the man who had broken his back to give them a future. Samuel didn't beg. He didn't chase. He simply existed. Until that night. The diner's door swung open, and a man stepped inside, shaking the rain from his expensive suit. Ethan Wallace. He was young, ruthless, and carried the air of someone who believed the world was beneath him. At 34, he had clawed his way to the top of a prestigious finance firm, and now he owned it. Ethan didn't just dislike old people, he despised them. Weak, slow, useless, a waste of space. And black men like Samuel, to him, they were beneath even that. That night, Ethan was in a foul mood. A deal had gone south, and he needed to lash out. When he spotted Samuel sitting quietly, sipping his coffee, he saw a perfect target. He walked over, sneering down at the old man. "You've been sitting here all night. You even got money to pay for that, old man?" Samuel looked up, his deep, wise eyes locking onto Ethan's. There was no fear, no anger, just the tired patience of a man who had seen far worse in his 65 years. "I paid. Leave me be." But Ethan wasn't done. He wanted to humiliate him, make himself feel powerful. "People like you, lazy, useless, sitting around, waiting for a handout. Pathetic." The waitress rushed over, panicked. "Sir, please, he's done nothing wrong." Ethan scoffed. "He's done nothing at all, just another nobody who let life pass him by." He turned to Samuel again. "Get up, leave." For a long moment, Samuel just stared. Then slowly he stood. Not because he was afraid, not because Ethan had power over him, but because he had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. As he walked toward the door, Ethan called after him. "You'll die forgotten, old man. People like you always do." Samuel didn't turn back, but something changed that night. Not for Ethan, not yet, but for Samuel. Because in the apartment building where he lived, someone had been watching. A neighbor, a young man named Jordan. And Jordan? He had an idea that would change everything. Just a quick reminder, subscribe. The night air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked pavement as Samuel Carter walked the quiet streets toward his apartment. His hands were deep in his coat pockets, shielding them from the cold, but the chill he felt wasn't from the weather. It was from Ethan's words. "You'll die forgotten, old man. People like you always do." He had spent his whole life proving people wrong. As a young man, he had fought against every obstacle thrown his way. Poverty, racism, the weight of being a single father after his wife passed. He had given everything to his daughters, believing that if he loved them enough, if he gave them the best, they would never turn away from him. But here he was, alone, forgotten. He stepped into the dimly lit hallway of his apartment building, his old bones aching as he climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. When he reached his door, he noticed someone sitting outside his neighbor's apartment. A young man, Jordan Miller. He was in his mid-20s, a struggling writer who had moved into the building 6 months ago. He wasn't like the others who ignored Samuel. He was curious about him, always offering a smile, a nod, sometimes even a brief conversation. But tonight, Jordan wasn't just passing by. He was waiting. "Mr. Carter," he said, standing up, "I saw what happened back at the diner." Samuel sighed, unlocking his door. It's nothing, kid. Just another man with too much power and not enough sense. Jordan hesitated before speaking. It's not nothing. It's wrong. Samuel gave him a tired smile. Son, I've lived long enough to know that what's wrong and what's reality don't always match up. Jordan leaned against the wall. I know you don't like talking about your past, but I think you have a story to tell. Samuel paused. A story? Jordan nodded. I'm a writer, and I know a great story when I see one. He hesitated before adding, I also know what it's like to feel like no one's listening. For a moment, the two men stood in silence. Then Samuel chuckled softly. You think people would care to hear the story of an old fool who gave everything and ended up with nothing? Jordan met his eyes. I think the world is full of people who feel forgotten, and maybe they need someone to remind them they still matter. Samuel studied the young man's face. There was no pity in his eyes, only determination. And for the first time in years, Samuel felt something stir inside him. Hope. He pushed open his door and gestured inside. All right, kid. Let's see if you can keep up. That night, the first chapter of Samuel Carter's story was born, and neither of them knew it yet, but that story, it was about to change everything. Jordan sat at Samuel's small wooden table, his notebook open, pen poised, waiting. Across from him, Samuel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, staring at the blank page. Writing a book. The idea was ridiculous. What could he possibly say that anyone would care to read? But then a voice whispered in the back of his mind. You'll die forgotten, old man. People like you always do. No, not if he had anything to do with it. Samuel exhaled and met Jordan's expectant gaze. All right, kid, if you want to hear my story, you're going to get all of it. The pain, the love, the regret. He paused. But you need to understand one thing. This ain't a fairy tale. It doesn't have a happy ending. Jordan clicked his pen. Let's start at the beginning. Samuel was born in 1958 in the Deep South, where the color of his skin determined the weight of his burdens. His mother scrubbed floors for rich white families. His father was a war veteran who came back home only to fight a different war, one where a black man had no place unless he was serving. But Samuel was different. He dreamed of something bigger. He worked hard, studied harder, and refused to accept the world's limitations. Then, at 22, he met Margaret. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, strong-willed, intelligent, and beautiful in a way that made the world stop when she walked into a room. She was also white. And in 1980, that was a dangerous thing for a black man and a white woman in their town. But love doesn't listen to rules. They ran away together, built a life, and against all odds, they were happy. When Margaret gave birth to twin girls, Samuel thought he had won. Ava and Eleanor. One black, one white. Two halves of a love story that defied history. He gave them everything. Private schools, ballet lessons, expensive gifts. He worked double shifts, triple shifts, so they would never have to know hunger. He believed that if he gave them the best life, they would always love him for it. But love, he learned, isn't built on money. Margaret got sick when the girls were teenagers. Cancer. It took everything from them, her laughter, her warmth, and eventually, her life. Samuel was left to raise two daughters alone, drowning in grief while trying to hold his family together. And for a while he did, until the day they left him. He remembered it vividly. The moment he signed the last check, handing over the remainder of his savings to fund their dreams, Ava's law firm, Eleanor's fashion boutique. They hugged him, thanked him, and then they vanished. No calls, no visits, no happy birthday, Dad, nothing. They had erased him from their lives like a bad memory. Jordan stopped writing. His fingers tightened around his pen. They just left you? Samuel let out a dry chuckle. Not at first, it was slow. First they got too busy. Then they forgot little things. Then they just forgot me. Jordan's jaw clenched. That's messed up, Samuel shrugged. That's life. Jordan shook his head. No, that's their choice, and they're going to regret it. Samuel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe, but it doesn't matter now. They made their choice. Now, I make mine. Jordan looked at him. And what's that? Samuel tapped the notebook. We finish this story, we tell the world. For the first time in years, Samuel wasn't just existing, he had a purpose. And as he and Jordan sat in that dimly lit apartment, neither of them realized just how much this story was about to shake the world. Jordan typed furiously, his fingers barely keeping up with the weight of Samuel's words. Night after night, they sat in that tiny apartment, pouring out decades of memories. Pain, triumph, betrayal, it all spilled onto the pages, raw and unfiltered. But something unexpected was happening. Samuel was changing. The bitterness in his voice softened, the weight in his eyes lightened. For the first time in years, he wasn't drowning in his past. He was reclaiming it. One night, as they took a break, Jordan looked at Samuel. "Do you ever think about reaching out to them?" Samuel stiffened. "No." Jordan hesitated. "But don't you wonder if they regret it? If they miss you?" Samuel scoffed. "They don't. People don't just forget someone they love." He leaned back, his gaze distant. "No, son, they made their choice. Now I make mine." Jordan nodded. He didn't push further, but deep down he had a feeling that Samuel's story wasn't finished yet. One evening, Jordan uploaded a short excerpt of Samuel's memoir to an online storytelling platform. Just a test, a way to gauge interest. He never expected what happened next. Within hours, the post had thousands of reactions. Comments poured in, people who saw their own pain in Samuel's words, people who had been forgotten, abandoned, betrayed. This broke me. Tell this man he is not alone. I need more. Where can I read the full book? Jordan's hands shook as he called Samuel. "You're going viral." Samuel frowned. "I don't even know what that means." Jordan laughed. "It means people care. They're listening." Samuel blinked. "People care?" Jordan turned the screen to show him the messages. Samuel read them, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned away. He didn't want Jordan to see his eyes glisten, because for the first time in 20 years, someone was listening. And it wasn't his daughters. It was the world. As weeks passed, the book deal came. Then the interviews. People wanted to hear Samuel's voice, his wisdom. The old man who had been tossed aside became a legend overnight. One night, as Jordan scrolled through messages, his eyes widened. He recognized the name immediately. Ava Carter, his daughter. She had sent an email. The subject line, "We need to talk." Jordan's breath caught. He turned to Samuel, whose eyes were fixed on the screen. A storm raged behind them. After all these years, they had remembered him. But was it too late? Samuel stared at the screen, his body rigid. The name on the email, Ava Carter, his daughter. The girl he had held in his arms, fed when she was hungry, protected from the world. The girl who had forgotten him. Jordan's voice was cautious. "Do you want to open it?" Samuel exhaled, rubbing his temples. A war waged inside him. He had spent years dreaming of this moment, his daughters realizing what they had done, begging for forgiveness. But now that it was here, he wasn't sure if he wanted it. He reached out, his hand hovering over the mouse. From Ava Carter's subject, "We need to talk, Dad. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But please, if you can find it in your heart, I need to see you. There's something you don't know, something I need to tell you in person." Ava. Jordan studied Samuel's face. "What do you think she means?" Samuel clenched his jaw. "I don't know, and I don't care." Jordan hesitated. "You really don't want to see her?" Samuel stood, pacing the room. "She made her choice, kid. Both of them did." He shook his head. "They only remember me now because the world does." But deep down something gnawed at him. "There's something you don't know." Days passed. Ava sent another email, then another. Eleanor finally wrote too. Jordan watched as Samuel ignored them, but one night he found the old man staring at the emails, his fingers twitching over the keyboard. Finally Samuel sighed. "Fine. One meeting. No second chances." Jordan nodded. "Where?" Samuel smirked. "The diner. The same place Ethan humiliated him. The place where this all began." The night of the meeting, Samuel arrived early. The diner was quieter than usual, but the sting of that day still lingered in his memory. Then the door opened. Ava and Eleanor walked in. For a moment, Samuel couldn't breathe. Ava, tall, poised, dressed in an elegant business suit. Eleanor, softer, wrapped in a designer coat, her blonde hair falling in waves. Two women from different worlds, yet both carrying the same look in their eyes. Guilt. They sat down, fidgeting. Ava spoke first. "Dad, I don't know where to start." Samuel leaned back, arms crossed. "Start with why." Eleanor swallowed. "We messed up." Samuel chuckled dryly. "That's an understatement." Ava took a deep breath. "It wasn't just greed, Dad. We weren't trying to hurt you." Her voice cracked. "There's something you don't know." She hesitated. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an old, faded letter. She slid it across the table. Samuel frowned, but took it. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the paper. His wife's handwriting. My love, if you're reading this, I'm gone. There's something I never told you, something I was afraid would break you. Your daughters, they were never meant to leave you. I made them. When I was dying, I begged them to go. I told them they had to leave you behind, or they'd never escape the weight of our past. I didn't want them to watch you suffer like I did. I wanted them to build their lives without carrying the pain of mine. Forgive them, Samuel. They never forgot you. They just didn't know how to come back. Samuel's vision blurred. The room around him faded. For years, he had believed they had abandoned him. But the truth was, Margaret had pushed them away. Ava's voice was barely a whisper. We listened to her, Dad. We thought we were doing what was best, but we were wrong. Eleanor wiped her tears. We never stopped loving you. Samuel stared at the letter, his hands shaking. A lifetime of pain, a lifetime of feeling forgotten, all because of one final wish from the woman he loved. Jordan, sitting in the booth beside him, held his breath. Then, after what felt like forever, Samuel whispered, I don't know if I can forgive you. Ava nodded, tears spilling down her face. I know, but I can try. And for the first time in decades, the old man felt something he had long buried. Hope. The diner's neon light flickered against the rain-streaked windows. Samuel sat in silence, the letter clutched in his trembling hands. For so many years, he had built his life around a single truth. His daughters had abandoned him, but that truth was a lie. Margaret, his beloved wife, had pushed them away to protect them. Now, Ava and Eleanor sat before him, waiting, hoping, terrified. Eleanor was the first to break the silence. Dad, I don't expect you to understand right away, but we do love you. We always have. Samuel exhaled, his voice hoarse. You left me with nothing. Every penny he had ever given them, Margaret had saved away in his name. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. His breath caught. She kept it? Ava nodded. She always knew you'd need it one day. She just didn't want you to rely on it. She wanted you to fight for yourself first. Samuel's vision blurred. All those years of struggle, of hunger, of pain, and all along, his wife had been watching over him, even in death. He closed the book and looked at his daughters. I don't need the money. Eleanor smiled through her tears. We know. Samuel exhaled slowly. What do you want from me? Ava wiped her tears. Just a chance to be your daughters again. Samuel looked between them. His heart ached. Forgiveness wouldn't come easy, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to try. He had stared at the book, his heart sinking with every page. The words painted a picture of a man he had once dismissed as worthless, a man he had looked down upon because of his skin color. And now here he was, a celebrated author, a legend, a man respected by the world. And Ethan? He was nothing but a racist fool who had spat on the very man who had raised his wife. His palms were sweating as he watched Samuel walk onto the stage, standing tall and proud. The old man scanned the crowd, his sharp eyes landing on him. Samuel began his speech, his voice commanding yet calm. I have been forgotten, I have been abandoned, and yes, I have been humiliated. Ethan felt his heart pound, but life has a way of bringing justice. The words struck like a whip. Samuel knew. Ethan tensed, gripping Eleanor's hand as she watched her father with admiration. Samuel's gaze didn't waver. I have met many people in my life, some who have lifted me up, others who have tried to break me. The room was silent. Samuel's eyes lingered on Ethan. But I stand here today, not broken, but victorious. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. Samuel wasn't going to expose him. He was going to let him drown in his own shame, and it was worse. Because now Ethan would have to live with it. Samuel wasn't the weak old man he had mocked. He was a giant. A year ago, I was nothing. I had given everything I had, my love, my money, my life, to the people I thought would never leave me. And yet I found myself alone, forgotten. He scanned the crowd, his gaze pausing on two familiar faces, Ava and Eleanor. They sat in the front row, their eyes filled with emotion. But life, he continued, has a way of surprising you. A small chuckle rippled through the audience. I thought aging was a curse, that growing old meant becoming useless, invisible. But I was wrong. Aging is not a sickness. It's not the end. It's just another chapter. Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. I was humiliated by a man who judged me by the color of my skin. I was abandoned by the children I had sacrificed everything for. but instead of breaking me, it made me stronger. He looked to the side of the stage where Jordan stood, beaming with pride. And sometimes, when you least expect it, the right people come into your life. Jordan wiped at his eyes as the audience clapped. My story is not just about pain, it's about redemption, about second chances, about the power of writing your own ending. The crowd erupted into cheers. I am proof that no matter how old you are, no matter how much you've lost, you can still rise. You can still change your story. He let the words sink in. Then, with a small smile, he said, "And trust me, the best part of my life is just beginning." As the standing ovation shook the auditorium, Samuel stepped back, his heart pounding. Ava and Eleanor rushed to him, tears streaming down their faces. "Dad," Ava whispered, her voice breaking, "we're so proud of you." Eleanor nodded, "We love you." For a long moment, Samuel just looked at them. He could still feel the scars of the past, the pain of their absence. But as he pulled them into an embrace, he realized something. He had survived it all, and now he was truly free. What a powerful lesson. Age is not a weakness, and respect should never be based on appearances. If this story inspired you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon so you never miss another jaw-dropping story like this. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.